everyone. My name is Melissa Manrique, and the theorist that I have been assigned for this week is Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. The interesting part about Pavlov is that he was not a psychology student. He was a physiologist. He is most famous for being the first one to describe the development of classical conditioning in his experiments with dogs. The whole idea of classical conditioning came about when Pavlov was studying the eating habits of dogs. In 1904, he won the Nobel Prize for studying the digestive process. So during this time, while he was studying the dogs, he noticed some pretty interesting things about the dogs. One of the things that he noticed was that the food in his dog's mouth caused the dogs to salivate. So now every time he would open up his cabinet to get the dog's food, the cabinet door made a creaking sound. So one day, Pavlov opened the cabinet door, made a creaking sound, and he noticed that his dog started to salivate, but without the foods. This is when he started working on his theory on classical conditioning, which remains one of the most important in psychology history because it incorporates behavioral modification and mental health treatment. So now, what is classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is an early form of behaviorism that pairs a neutral stimulus with a stimulus that causes a response. In classical conditioning, it is important to involve a neutral signal before a naturally occurring reflex. Now, as we see in Pavlov's experiment, the neutral stimulus was the sound of the bell and the stimulus was the salivation. So I don't know if some of you remember that, and I will show you an image right now. So Pavlov demonstrated this technique by using the dogs. The dogs instinctively salivated when meat was presented. Every time the meat was presented, Pavlov rang a bell. Eventually, the dogs learned to associate the bell with the meat. So when the bell was rung, the dogs would salivate even when no meat was present. So as we look at this, I went ahead and printed out a picture, and I'm going to include a presentation. As we look at this, we see when the dogs before conditioning, you see the food as the unconditioned stimulus and the unconditioned response. Actually, a neutral stimulus does not produce a response. So as you can see here, before the conditioning, the neutral stimulus is the bell because the dog has not been trained on the sound. So when Pavlov did during conditioning, he noticed that with a combination of the neutral stimulus and an unconditional stimulus, there was a response. So now the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus. I know it's pretty confusing to understand, but what he did is he paired both stimulus in order to create a response. Then after the conditioning, after so many times he conditioned, he went ahead and took the food out, one of the stimulus, and just left the conditioning stimulus, which was the neutral stimulus, and then he trained the dog to salivate just with the sound of the bell. What is important about this concept of classical conditioning is that it has been integrated in behavioral therapy. And it's an approach to alter behavior by using techniques. And this type of therapy is often referred today as applied behavior analysis. And some of you have heard about applied behavioral analysis because it's usually a technique that's used in autistic children, which they repeat a behavior over and over. They try to condition the child to learn that behavior by doing it routinely every single day. And one of the things that led to this behavioral theory is that a gentleman by the name of John B. Watson, he did the little Albert experiment because he became very interesting in Pavlov's the classical conditioning. So what happened was that little Albert at 9 months was exposed to a series of stimuli, including a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, a mask, and burning newspapers. So when he was showing all these stimulus, there was no reaction, and the boy did not show any fear. But the next time Albert was exposed to the rat, Watson made a loud noise by hitting a metal pipe with a hammer. Naturally, the child began to cry after hearing the loud noise. So he did it repeatedly, and he noticed that. So Albert began to cry simply after seeing the rat. So once he removed the noise from little Albert and he just showed him the rat, little Albert made a distinction of the rat with the noise, and just by showing the rat, he started to cry. So one of the things that now the classical conditioning does in behavior modification is that it's included two types of strategies, which is the flooding, which involves exposing people to fear-invoking objects or situation intensely and rapidly. It is often used to treat phobias, anxieties, and other stress-related disorders. So, for example, if you have a client who has an intense fear of dogs, usually what you would do is you expose them to a small dog every single day, a small friendly dog, and soon enough, when that individual starts seeing that dog over and over and over, the fear starts to fade away. So that would be flooding. The other one would be systematic desensitization, and it involves having a client make a list of fears and then teaching the individual to relax while concentrating on those fears. So you're trying to teach the client to relax, but at the same time focus on those fears. So that's my theorist, Mr. Pavlov, in classical conditioning. Some of my resources that I got was from Kendra Sherry from Introduction to Classical Conditioning, and also Saul McLeod, which is Classical Conditioning, Simple Psychology. If you all want more information, I'll go ahead and include a PowerPoint. I did do a PowerPoint with the references at the end. But hopefully this video helps you out, understand a little bit about classical conditioning. And I really had a good time researching this topic. Thank you.